You know that feeling when you've been hurt so badly that you just want to build a massive wall around yourself and shut the entire world out? Well, welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into a pretty incredible grimdark fable titled The Architecture of Desolation. And honestly, this isn't just your standard story. It's a really deep dive into both philosophy and psychology, tracing one wanderer's terrifying transformation. We're going to follow his path from being a deeply scarred victim all the way to becoming this unyielding iron fortress, and we'll see exactly how trauma can completely and radically rewire a human worldview.
So, our story kicks off with the Wanderer, drawn by the pull of the shifting dunes, arriving at this jagged temple of silence. And the text describes him as wearing an armor made of his own scar tissue, which is just such a brutal image, right? For him, even the mere idea of seeking companionship is the ultimate submission. He lives by this chilling inscription he finds: a necessary descent into evil is required to conquer oneself. Now, he doesn't look at that and see a warning. No, for him, it's total validation. He actually views his original terror as the exact forge that built his, quote, iron crown.
To really get inside the Wanderer's head, we have to unpack the brutal philosophy that's basically his operating system: extreme social Darwinism. In his mind, the universe isn't just casually indifferent, it actively demands the destruction of the weak. So, logically, survival relies on absolute self-containment. It's a total rejection of community or shared strength, basically framing isolation as literally the only rational response to a wildly hostile world. And what follows is essentially an inverted hero's journey. Instead of a path to enlightenment, the Wanderer descends through 5 chambers of a dark abyss. These are 5 parables that methodically strip away his humanity, piece by piece. Each step down is a deeper level of isolation.
Inside the first chamber, we hit the parable of the severed shadow. Here, the Wanderer watches a man desperately trying to stitch his shadow to another person's. And the result? It's incredibly stark. The man's own shadow eventually rises up and strangles him, simply because he made that attempt to connect.
That haunting scene totally cements his core belief about relationships. To tie one's soul to another is to hand them the shears to cut your throat. It's in this first chamber that he fully internalizes the idea that a crowd is nothing more than a collection of crutches. To him, any human connection is just a fortress out of dust, structurally doomed to collapse and crush you.
As we move deeper into the temple, the fable starts revealing the massive emotional cost of this mindset. Now, in modern psychological terms, we probably diagnose this as extreme avoidant detachment or maybe trauma-induced hyperindependence. But for him, it's a conscious, highly systematic destruction of his soft human emotions. The exact traits we'd normally say make a mind healthy and functional.
Just look at how he methodically redefines human virtue here. From a philological standpoint, his choice of words is fascinating. It's all very clinical, very transactional. In the parable of the frozen tear, he watches a mother weep for her child with what the text calls a cold, clinical disgust. Empathy? To him, that's a voluntary infection that dulls the mind. Love is just mortgaging your peace to the grave. Mercy is a luxury bought by the blind. He literally strips the humanity right out of these concepts, fully believing that to conquer oneself, you have to harden like a desert drought, a drought that absolutely does not apologize for the devastation it causes.
Which brings us right into the third chamber, the parable of the shattered blade. This is governed by what he calls the Law of Subtraction. And the logic here is brutal, but honestly, it's flawlessly consistent with his worldview. He believes that sparing an enemy actually insults the nature of existence, that the forgiving hand just invites the heavier blow. By his rationale, mercy isn't a virtue, it's a fatal evolutionary flaw. If you aggressively subtract the soft parts of yourself, well, only the jagged, indestructible elements remain.
Deep in the temple now, he enters the 4th chamber, the parable of the salt mirror. He stares down into this pool of salt, and it perfectly mirrors the desolate environment where he first experienced abandonment. But, staring into that void, he doesn't see himself as a victim anymore. Actually, scratch that. He actively redefines that past abandonment as a necessary, almost biological selection process.
He arrives at this wildly chilling conclusion. Trauma is not a wound to be healed. It is a necessary crucible for greatness. The survivor has to stop weeping for the day that died. Instead, the fable says, he smiles at his bleeding feet, completely accepting his profound loneliness as his final unyielding shape. I mean, it's a masterful, if terrifying, psychological reframing of his own pain. Finally, at the very bottom of the abyss in the parable of the dying fire, there's this flame, and it burns on pure, consuming rage.
But the key detail about this fire, it requires absolutely zero fuel from the outside world. It sustains itself entirely, completely cut off, just endlessly feeding on its own destructive energy.
That right there is the absolute pinnacle of self-containment. He has officially become the missionary of desolation. And that word desolation is super important here. It doesn't just mean emptiness. It implies a deliberate laying waste. He strips away the illusions of everyone else, exactly like the sand stripped away his own, with the sole goal of turning the world into a mirror of his unyielding heart. He's no longer just reacting to a cruel world, you see. He's actively trying to become its purest expression.
All of this builds up to a massively explosive monologue directed at the walls of the temple itself, the diatribe of the jagged soul. This is where his transformation is complete, and he defends it with everything he has. What the rest of the world calls evil, he loudly declares is simply the unmasking of reality.
He sets up this incredibly stark contrast between his self-image and society. He is the metal and the hammer. He is the unyielding stone, the unapologetic frost. On the flip side, he looks at communities and sees nothing but cattle before a storm. He truly believes people just huddle together in a herd, pretending their mutual cowardice is a form of strength, using each other as crutches and hiding behind fragile shields made of glass. He yells, "The desert gave me teeth because it knew I was the metal and the world was the hammer." He firmly declares that kindness is just a temporary delusion and affection is guaranteed to shatter the very second the inevitable blow falls. This perfectly encapsulates the absolute emotional void of his transformation. He has quite literally weaponized his own isolation. And so, he reaches his dark endpoint. He is fully willing to let the world burn in its own perceived warmth until it rots. The descent from a vulnerable, scarred victim into an isolated monument of stone is totally finished. He isn't looking for a home anymore, and he is definitely not looking for redemption.
Which leaves us with a pretty heavy thought to reflect on as we wrap up this explainer. We really have to ask ourselves about the true price of the Wanderer's philosophy. Is this absolute radical self-containment actually the ultimate survival strategy against a harsh universe? Or, by systematically eradicating every single human emotion and severing every bond, is this simply the final tragic stage of self-destruction? If an iron crown crushes the person wearing it, is it actually just a tomb? Thanks so much for joining me in the Abyss today. Let me know what you think.